Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The American people have a right to know that taxpayer dollars are well spent. We have a responsibility to stay up with the times. As government has grown, waste, fraud, and abuse and mismanagement has increased. Today, however, the technology is before us if we simply embrace it to do a far better job of accounting for every dollar spent on behalf of the American people. That's not just the American dollars that are spent by the federal government, but dollars passed on to private sector, to the states, to public entities, and nonprofits. Today, as those trillions of dollars are put out, we find that we don't know where they're spent. At best, we know the first place they went to. Under the Recovery Act, often called the stimulus, we can all disagree or agree on how the money was spent. But unlike previous appropriations, under that act, we found a way to do a better job of tracing the dollars. Tracing the dollars through recipient reporting, a system that, although it cost a little bit to do, ultimately, once set up, saves money. The Data Act before us today will literally track those trillions of dollars in a way not done outside of the Recovery Act. Quite frankly, we owe a debt of gratitude to the Recovery Board for showing us an effective system on which we could build. Just a few days ago, our committee, on a very bipartisan basis, evaluated the GSA's lavish spending. They explained to us that part of the way they spent $830,000+ was in fact to cobble together, as they put it, multiple baskets of money. Meaning, if you didn't know and couldn't trace how they spent their money, you wouldn't know that it was spent on a mind reader and a clown. You wouldn't know that those 10 trips essentially were privately or publicly funded trips so that key executives could have family vacations. With the Data Act, we expect that and many other wasteful practices to be brought to an end. Some of them will be brought to the end by the ranking member and our work on the committee, but a great many of them will be brought to bear by the American people being able to search online and learn what they currently cannot learn. The Data Act has been a bill that has been, unlike many, completely bipartisan. The minority and the majority have worked hand in hand. We come to you today with a bill that has been agreed to and that will save, I repeat, save billions of dollars. Additionally, we do, in fact, amend some of the abuses under the GSA scandal and do so based on the good work of Representative Dennis Ross of Florida, who introduced strong language to do exactly what we're doing today. So before we go on, let me just say that I want to thank the ranking member, because the work on this bill, the reason this bill is before us on suspension is that we've been able to work hand in hand with members of the majority and minority and with key staff on both sides to make sure that we have a bill that will pass the House, hopefully on a unanimous basis, and clearly will see the Senate send a message that it's time for accountability generated from bipartisan work in the House, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from California reserves his time. The gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, first let me say that the Chairman Issa, has worked very closely with us as we co-sponsor this bill and has worked hard to make sure that all of its provisions are satisfactory to this side. And so he is absolutely right, Madam Speaker. It is truly a bipartisan bill, and again, I thank him. Taxpayers deserve to know how their money is being spent, and we on our committee, as we believe, not only us but all the Congress, have a responsibility to assure that those hard-earned tax dollars are spent effectively and efficiently. H.R. 2146, the Digital Accountability and Transparency Act, will make the federal government more accountable by making it easier for taxpayers to see where their money is going. By making government spending more transparent, we will hopefully reduce wasteful spending. This bill aims to capitalize on the success of the Recovery, Accountability, and Transparency Board. Democrats in Congress created the board as a part of the Recovery Act in 2009. In addition to promoting job creation, economic activity, and long-term growth, the Recovery Act fostered unprecedented accountability and transparency in government spending. Under the administration's implementation and the RATS board oversight, the Recovery Act has had historically low levels of waste, fraud, and abuse. The successful implementation of the Recovery Act should be a model for improving transparency and accountability in all federal spending. The Data Act would do many of the same things the President directed by executive order in June of 2011. The Data Act would establish a new independent commission to lead the government's efforts on federal spending, transparency, and accountability. The new commission would be authorized to set government-wide data standards and coordinate oversight of federal funds to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. I supported this legislation when it was considered by the Oversight Committee in June, but I had several concerns which I asked Chairman Issa to work with me in addressing. I commend the Chairman for bringing an amendment to the floor today that addresses those concerns. This bill also includes language requiring agencies to disclose spending on conferences and to justify their location and cost efficiency. The bill as amended also requires agencies to reduce their travel spending by 20% from fiscal year 2010 levels. The President directed agencies to reduce travel spending in an executive order issued on November 9, 2011. When he signed that executive order to cut waste and to promote efficient spending, he said this, and I quote, "We can't wait for Congress to act. We can't wait for them to get our fiscal house in order and make the investments necessary to keep America great. That's why today I'm signing an executive order that will build on our efforts to cut waste and promote more efficient spending across the government. We're cutting what we don't need so that we can invest in what we do need," end of quote. Let's show the President that Congress can and will act to reduce wasteful spending, and I urge my colleagues to join me, our Chairman, and our committee in supporting this legislation. And with that, Madam Speaker, I reserve my time.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from California.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd now like to yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Langford.
Gentleman from Oklahoma, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If people call my office and ask a simple question, something as simple as, how much did this cost? It's difficult for even a member of Congress to be able to track down all the details. How much was allotted for that grant? How much was actually spent? How much was that contract? How much was actually spent? How much does this agency spend on X number of programs or on this specific program? An individual hardworking taxpayer should be able to go research that out. Outside groups should be able to research that and be able to develop some way to systematically research and compare. Right now, we can't do that. We may do something as labor intensive as mail them something or email them some things that we found, or maybe get a PDF document and be able to send to them, or send them to an agency website, but there's no systematic, structured way to be able to compare last year to this year, one agency to another agency, how this contract was done, how this grant was done. This is a great moment to be able to bring all that information together so that every group, including Congress, can pull that data, can research it. This gets to the essence of why transparency is such a big deal, because we want every single taxpayer to be able to look in and be able to see how their money is spent. That's an appropriate way to be able to respond to this. This also eliminates the duplication in reporting from a contractor or an agency that is actually trying to file this information to not have to do it multiple times to make it more efficient. This deals with the inconsistent requirements of reporting across different platforms. This deals with the basics of grant and contract recipients being able to also report in that data, as was done by the Recovery Board, which has been very successful in getting accurate information in. This also engages those outside individuals, grant writers, or grant recipients and contract recipients, to be able to come back in and process that data so we get real-time information. And it deals with one of the most basic things, efficient use of money. In this particular bill, dealing with all these conferences, reducing the cost of government conferences, finding some way to be able to put some parameters around them and structure so that money is not pulled from one place or another to be able to function at conference. A conference that doesn't have a $250,000 budget, spending $850,000 for a single event. I reiterate what we've said on both sides of the aisle. Transparency is not a partisan issue. This is a bipartisan bill. And whoever is in the White House and whoever is running agencies, just like Congress, is accountable to all the American people. So this makes all of what we do publicly available, easy to be able to research, easy to be able to compare. It is a simple way to take this on. I'm strongly in support of this and grateful that it's a very bipartisan act. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman from Oklahoma yields back. The gentleman from Maryland.
Madam Speaker, I grant the gentlelady from New York 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Gentlelady from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding and for his leadership, and I thank the chairman for his leadership. This is truly a bipartisan effort and one that is sorely needed, as we can see from the hearing that we held last week in the Oversight and Government Reform Committee on the General Accounting Office. I mean, it was just outrageous that they would spend over $800,000 for some conference with mind readers and clowns when so many Americans are struggling and working hard. This bill will help prevent that this type of abuse will not happen again. And I am rising in strong support of H.R. 2146, the Digital Accountability and Transparency Act. It is good government. It is bipartisan. It is something that we can all agree on. It is common sense, and if it had been in place earlier, we could have possibly prevented the type of abuse that we are both dedicated to cleaning up. This bill will improve congressional oversight of how federal dollars are being spent. This bill does this by creating a single online portal where information about federal spending can be tracked. The bill requires recipients of federal grants, loans, and contracts to disclose how much money they receive and how that money is spent, and reduces the compliance burden on recipients of federal funds by streamlining reporting and establishing universal data standards. The Congressional Budget Office has certified that H.R. 2146 contains no intergovernmental or private sector mandates as defined by the Unfunded Mandates Reform Act, and would impose no additional costs on state, local, or tribal governments, end quote. This is designed to save money and to save the taxpayers and to allow the public to have insight into how these dollars are being spent too. The Data Act capitalizes on the reporting required under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act and President Obama's executive order establishing the Government Accountability and Transparency Board, and it will give legislative teeth to increase transparency and accountability over federal spending across the government. The Data Act also caps non-military travel spending at 20% below FY10 levels and limits both the number of and amount spent on agency conferences, which will save taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars per year. So this is truly something we can all agree upon. The technology is there. This bill puts the political will behind having this accountability. We do know how to track this. This will be in one centralized place. It will be available to the public, and it's an improvement in all ways. Currently available data on federal spending is incomplete, confusing, and inconsistent. This act would centralize and simplify the convoluted reporting that is in place now. And everything would be reported in the same way, and the bill also includes uniform reporting from the recipients of the federal funds, and very importantly, all of this would be available to the public. The independent commission that would be established by this would be responsible for publishing and monitoring federal spending. A number of diverse groups have come out in favor of it. I have roughly 20 groups that have written in support of the bill, from the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Government, to the Taxpayers for Common Sense, to POGO, to OMB Watch. I'd like to, with unanimous consent, place their record and comments in the record.
Without objection.
I believe this is an important bill. I believe it will make government perform better, save taxpayers money, and the time of those who are tracking where these dollars are going. It is well overdue, and it should pass today. I urge all my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to vote for this important piece of legislation. I yield my time back to the ranking member.
Gentlelady yields her time. Gentleman from California.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd now like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Ross, the author of many of the reforms in this bill.
Gentleman from Florida, recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Chairman, for yielding. I rise in strong support of the Digital Accountability and Transparency Act of 2011, also known as the DATA Act. The DATA Act finally does what America wants, opens up the books of government and lets the taxpayers see what is being spent. The bill also cuts agency travel spending by hundreds of millions of dollars per year, a great and necessary first step. By requiring federal agencies to report how their funds are spent and capping travel expenses, this common sense, bipartisan bill will bring much needed accountability and transparency to federal spending. The DATA Act should also send a clear message to bureaucrats here in Washington, D.C. The American taxpayer is watching, and they're sick and tired of the blank check mentality. Let's make sure that taxpayer dollars are no longer spent on lavish conferences, but with this bill, we can also begin to crowdsource all federal spending. I thank the gentleman from California, Mr. Issa, for introducing this bill and for his leadership on transparency and accountability in government. Let's make sure that common sense becomes something common in government. Please join me in supporting the DATA Act, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields his time. The gentleman from Maryland.
We continue to reserve.
Continues to reserve. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I have no other speakers other than myself for closing, so I'll reserve subject to closing.
Very well.
Gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Maryland.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
We, as the chairman stated and others have stated on this floor, we saw the abuses that took place at GSA, and we will certainly continue to follow them because I believe that all of us were very upset about those abuses, Madam Speaker. One of the things that we do believe is that legislation like this is so important because it shines a light on how money is being spent. It won't solve all the problems, but it certainly will solve a lot of them. One of the things that Mr. Devaney said, who was over the stimulus bill in the RAT board there, is that he wanted to do certain things that not only would lay out a formula for accountability, but would prevent people from even abusing the system. And again, I think what we're doing here puts us out front of hopefully some things that people may have been thinking about doing. We don't even want them to think about it because there's so many people in our districts who work so hard to earn their money and they don't mind paying their taxes. They don't mind sacrificing, as long as they know that that money is being spent effectively and efficiently. And one of the things that we have to do, Madam Speaker, is to make sure that we establish and maintain a trust with them, so that when they write that check, that they know it's going towards the roads that they want to see built, going towards making sure the air is clean and making sure that the park rangers are present. They want to see that money spent properly. They don't want to see it spent on some bureaucrats flying around the country using the money in an improper way. So with this bill and this bipartisan bill, I think we send a message to the public that we're going to do everything in our power to make sure that they have as much information as possible about where that money goes when it leaves their checking account. And because of that, and because this bill is so significant, and because it is about a truly bipartisan effort, I'm hoping that we will have every member of the House voting in favor of it. And with that, Madam Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The gentleman from California.
Thank you. I yield myself such time as I may consume to close.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, the expression we often hear about success and failure is that success has many fathers. Well, in fact, failure is an orphan. This bill will not be an orphan. In fact, the work of Ranking Member Cummings, along with Representative Maloney, Representative Sherman, Representative Colin Peters' son, and the former chairman of the full committee, Ed Towns, on just one side have been critical in getting this done. The support of Jason Chaffetz, of Dan Burton, of Blake Farenthold, of the gentleman who spoke a minute ago, James Langford, Mike Kelly, Tom Latham, Patrick McHenry, and Dennis Ross, all have been critical in this process. But perhaps less often heard would be, as the ranking member referred, former Inspector General and Chairman of the Recovery Board, Earl Devaney, has been critical to shepherding the process that has gone on over 2 Congresses, and I want to thank him personally while he's enjoying his well-earned retirement. Along with him was Vice President Joe Biden, who has been supportive and helped us in this process and held numerous meetings at the White House on behalf of it. In the Senate, Mark Warner of Virginia has championed and introduced the companion product, making it bipartisan in both houses. Additionally, as I think the ranking member alluded to, the Sunlight Foundation, the Project for Government Oversight, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, the Americans for Tax Reform, the Data Transparency Coalition, and XBRL US have all been critical. And the last one I mentioned is particularly critical because the need for standards that ultimately are set that allow for this transparency are going to come not from us in government, but from organizations who have open and transparent capability that we will leverage. All of these and more are to be thanked today. I want to close by saying the winners with this effort will be the American people. And they'll be the American people because when this is fully implemented, American people who are used to Googling for information outside of government will find it possible to get meaningful information on where their hard-earned tax dollars are being spent just as quickly. And that's the goal of our committee, is to recognize that the 100 or so staff and members on both sides of the aisle of the Oversight Committee cannot protect the American people alone. The 12,000 or so members of the Inspector General staff throughout government cannot protect the American people alone. But with data transparency and more access and sunlight available more broadly, we believe that these organizations can in fact have the kinds of whistleblowers and information providers that will allow us to scrub the balance sheet, to wrench out waste, fraud, and abuse in our government at any level. So I join with the ranking member in urging its unanimous support and yield back.
All time having expired, the question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 2146 as amended? Those in favor signify by saying aye. And opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chairs, 2/3 being affirmative, The rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.